Hello and welcome to Ave Explores Live, the first of our live Tuesday chats with different guests for our new series, Ave Explores Faith and Science. Just at the top, we could tell you that you can go find all of the awesome content that we're creating over at avemariapress.com. Right up at the top, you can click on it and get all of the content that we're making. So that's podcasts, that's videos, that's Facebook Live conversations, that's articles, all sorts of great, awesome things that we're creating just for you in the world of this new multimedia project that we're doing on specifically how the church finds a way to find the balance, to find the bridge between faith and science. And that's really what we're digging into. I mean, this was a topic that I kept coming back to in my head as we always plan out Ave Explorers series. I kept coming back to it in my head because my husband is a science teacher and he has students that frequently will walk into his classroom and ask big, colossal questions. And how is it that you can believe in, say, evolution, but also believe that God created the world? Things that we talk about, in fact, in this Ave Explores Faith and Science series. And so, as always, we have these wonderful Tuesday Facebook Live conversations where we bring in a guest to help us unpack that particular week's topic. This first week of Ave Explores Faith and Science, we're looking at environmental science, which is kind of sometimes even the first form of science that a student learns in high school. I took environmental science as a freshman, and then I took biology, and then I took physics, and that was kind of the extent of my scientific education, and I was totally fine with that. But we were really curious this week, and it actually reflects in our podcast, which you can find on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify, just Ave Explores. How do we as Catholics care for our common home? I'll use the buzzword from Pope Francis and his document Laudato Si. How do we as Catholics endeavor to serve this world in ways where we care for the world, where we're not just tossing out our recyclable materials, where we're not just wasting all sorts of different things, or we turn off the lights behind us when we walk out of a room, which is something that every boomer dad has been begging his kids to do for years. But how can we do that in a specific and even maybe a uniquely Catholic way? This Ave Explores Faith and Science series is really trying to answer two questions. And this will reflect in one of our podcast episodes with Dr. Chris Bagelow. And again, you can find all of this content over at avemariapress.com. And you can hear this conversation with Dr. Bagelow when it comes out in a couple of weeks. How science and faith are striving to answer two questions. Science is trying to ask how. How does something work? How does the sun rise? How do the planets rotate around the sun? How do we stop these catastrophic weather events from happening? And then faith endeavors to answer why. Why is something happening the way it is? Why is something unexplained? So faith and science are trying to answer these two questions, how and why, and in fact can work together to answer those questions. And we'll be digging into that throughout the course of this whole series, all of it available on avemariapress.com. We hope that you join us for all of that. Today, we are joined by someone who can help us really start to answer those questions about, let's say, environmental consciousness, about ways that we can be more aware of what we both produce and create. Just as a side note, you might notice too, I'm not in my home studio where we normally do these Ave Explores lives. I'm up in Clear Lake, Iowa in a sound studio. I'll be up here for the whole week working on a couple of other projects. So I'm sorry that we don't have our normal setup, although it's a nice little sound absorbing room. So hopefully you enjoy the time that we have together. I'm joined today by author. She's a fellow at Word on Fire. She's a podcaster. She's a mom. She's a wife. She's got great, awesome things to share and to say. And she's the author of a very popular book from Ave Maria Press, The Grace of Enough. Haley Stewart joins us from her home in Waco, Texas. Haley, thanks so much for joining us on Ave Explores Live.
Thanks so much for having me, Katie. I'm excited. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, so we're friends. We're like real life friends. But if we had never met and we bumped into each other in an elevator, what would I learn about you in the minute that we have together on this elevator in non-COVID times, when we're staying in hotels and able to hang out at restaurants, the whole 9 yards?
Right. Well, I'm a mom of 4. My youngest is 2 and my oldest is 12. He's almost a teenager.
Oh my gosh.
Weird. And I'm married to Daniel, who makes whiskey. That's his job, and keeps bees and homeschools our kids. So he's pretty cool. And then I'm an author and a podcaster. I do some projects for the Word on Fire Institute, which is a lot of fun. And then sometimes I do some speaking and that sort of thing as well.
Awesome. Well, I've always been a fan of your work, following your blog. I've always long thought that you're doing some amazing things within the life of the church. Folks can, of course, follow you on social media and check out your blog, Carrots for Michaelmas. Did I say that right? Michaelmas?
You got it.
.com.
Perfect.
So I want to jump right in, because we know that, folks are maybe watching this in their lunch hour, or they're watching it after the fact on IGTV. So you and your husband did something kind of crazy a number of years ago, where you, and I say crazy in a loving way, I don't think I could ever convince my husband to do this. You moved to a farm that I believe didn't have plumbing or toilets or something kind of crazy like that. Tell us a little bit about this desire to go out to the middle of nowhere. What was the goal of that journey?
So we were kind of in this stuck place. We had just had 3 babies in a row, so we're kind of coming up for air after that. My husband was working a lot of hours at a job that he didn't love. And we were in our late 20s, we were 28 or 29, and kind of going, is this what we want our life to look like from here on out? Like, we are not happy with what life looks like. We feel fragmented as a family, not getting enough time together. And we just wanted to kind of reset our lives and figure out how to really pursue the family life and the kind of good work that we wanted to pursue. And so to get unstuck, we did the kind of crazy thing. We sold our house. We got rid of most of our stuff. We quit our jobs, and we moved from Florida to Texas to do a year-long internship on a sustainable agriculture training farm that had no flushing toilets. So it was a no flush farm. And so we had running water, but we didn't have flushing toilets. And we moved into a little teeny tiny 650 square foot apartment with the 3 little kids we had at the time, and spent a year learning about, my husband did the livestock internship, and the rest of us were kind of along for the ride with him, living in community and learning farming for a year.
And have you become farmers since?
We are not full-time farmers. We entered it kind of wondering, is this going to make us want to buy a small farm and be farmers? And I think we learned that while we really enjoy the experience and we really enjoy farming, we didn't want that to be our livelihood, because it's really difficult to sustain a family with a small farm. And it felt like, okay, now we would just be going back to this stressed, working too many hours, not getting the time together, life that we are trying to avoid in the first place. So what we've done is just have a big backyard garden, and chickens, who, rest in peace chickens, they all got eaten by a wild dog recently.
Oh, no.
Which was just, it's a weird time. It's one of the weird things that's happened over the past couple of years. But, we've got garden beds with tomatoes and squash, and my daughters love planting sunflowers and doing different flower seeds, and just kind of trying to make it a family project on the side of the other things we're doing.
And you write about this story. I mean, this is a story you tell in The Grace of Enough, going to a no flush farm. I'm not sure I could ever do that. I deeply admire you for that. I make my husband change the diapers when he's home. Like that's how much I try to avoid that aspect of life. But I'm curious about some of those lessons that you learned that are really maybe something that we can pull from even the writings of Pope Francis in Laudato Si. I mean, being on a sustainable agriculture community farm, even though you didn't become farmers, you learned something about, I would even go so far to say, your faith in doing all of that.
Yes. So it was interesting because we moved to the farm kind of right as Laudato Si was coming on the scene. So it was great timing, because a lot of the interns at the farm were actually reading the encyclical and discussing it together all at the same time. And I think one of the things that stuck with me from the encyclical is he talks about how human beings have these 3 relationships. We have our relationship with God, our relationship with other people, and then our relationship with our common home, with God's creation. And when any of these 3 relationships are ruptured, that's sin. That's where sin comes in, and it affects all 3. Usually like one thing goes down and it's affecting our other 2 key relationships as well. And so being on the farm and experiencing this life where, yeah, what we're growing, that's what we're going to eat. That's what's going to be on the table. You know, these goats that we're feeding and cleaning out their stalls, that's the milk we're going to drink tomorrow morning. You know, all of that, as well as just getting to have the time outside connecting with God's creation and going, wow, that's a beautiful sunset. Wow, it was amazing seeing this pig give birth to these little baby piglets. This is just seeing the world with the eyes of wonder again as this glorious mystery, I think is the gift that we have been able to carry with us. And having our kids they were little at the time, 2, 3, and 5 turning 6. They were just completely in awe of all of these things. And so seeing it through their eyes, I think was really key to going, wow, that is amazing. God's creation is amazing. And when we look at it with these like childlike eyes of wonder, I think that that's a worshipful attitude, because we're saying, you know, God, the creator, is glorious. Look at what he's created.
I love this idea of that the goat that I milked is like, that's this goat that I'm feeding, this goat that I'm cleaning out their pen, is the milk that I'm going to be drinking tomorrow, is potentially the cheese that will eventually adorn my charcuterie board. That connected. How do you think the modern world has isolated us from that connectedness to the earth? Like I buy my milk in a jug from Sam's Club. I couldn't tell you where it comes from. I know that it's $3.50 and it's not going to expire until the end of the month. Like,
yeah,
we've lost some of that connectedness. Why do you think that is?
Well, I realized when we moved to the farm that I didn't have a good sense of what season different things grew in. Like I knew tomatoes were summer, but if you had said like, when are the carrots ready? I would have been like, I don't know. And because everything's in season at the grocery store, you know,
Right.
you walk in, everything's there. We don't, when we're not growing our own food, when we're not connected at all to the animals that we're eating or having dairy, then how would we know? You know, how would we know any of those things? Why would we have that connection? And I think that kind of disconnect in our relationship with our common home, you know, you can't love something you don't know, is this idea. You know, if we don't know God, how can we love God? If we don't really know another person, how can we love them well? And I think that's part of what we've lost, is when we don't have this knowledge and this connection, how can we love the world God has made and preserve it with this worshipful attitude towards its creator? It's just, it cuts us off. It's that rupture of the relationship that I think Pope Francis is talking about.
So this rupture occurs, this sin enters our life. Sometimes we don't even realize it. Like, it's not a sin to run my air conditioner, but I don't need to keep it at like 61 degrees if it's only 80 degrees outside. Like, there's got to be some balance that I can create. How do we start to kind of, just in your experience, and I'm asking this because I know that your family did this in some sense and are trying to do this now. What are maybe some practical things we can do? You know, oftentimes Laudato Si, I think, gets a bad rap, or people are just like, oh, that doesn't apply to me, or climate change isn't real. We hear that sometimes. How can I try to get back to that connectedness, even just like learning the seasonal growth of food?
Yeah, well, I think that one thing that has helped me is Pope Francis talks about, we live in a throwaway culture. That's how he describes the way that we connect with other human beings and connect with the earth, where it's as if we're wearing these glasses that see everything as consumer to consumable, whether that's the resources of the earth or whether it's other people. Like, I'm the consumer and I will use you, rather than I am the nurturer and I'm ready to love you. And so I think that the first step is kind of being aware of that. Like, okay, how do I see the earth? How do I see other people? How do I see the resources of God's world? I think that when we think about that, we'll go, oh, yeah, I have soaked up this throwaway attitude from the culture around me. It's in the air we breathe. And so I think acknowledging that and kind of noticing that is the first thing. And then from there going, okay, the antidote to the throwaway culture is the gospel. So how do I pursue the gospel in this way? Maybe that's through being careful about what products I'm using. Maybe it's being careful about the companies where I'm spending money. Pope Benedict said that every economic transaction isn't just economic, it's also a moral decision. We're making these decisions. So maybe I can spend money at the local bookstore where I know the owner and I know that's helping feed their family, rather than ordering my books from Amazon. What are the little steps I can do? How can we use up our leftovers, instead of wasting food? What can we do?
Yeah.
How can we maybe get connected with some local farmers or join a CSA to get our veggies from local farmers and support their business? It's just these, I think, switching our perspective and then seeing what are the small ways that my family can help pursue the gospel instead of be living in the throwaway culture. And I think a lot of times we feel paralyzed because, okay, maybe we can't move to a no-flush farm. What do we do now? Now I can't contribute to the preservation of the earth. We think if it can't be perfect, what's the point? But maybe it's just, hey, I'm going to grow an herb garden. And then I'm going to use those herbs in our meals. And when I do that, I'm going to remember that we're connected to this common home. And I'm going to praise God for these herbs and for everything he's created, and kind of develop this love for his creation in honor of him. And so I think it's just those little small steps, and not being paralyzed by realizing we can't completely turn back the clock on climate change by ourselves, and go from there. So switching the perspective, finding those small things that we can do.
Yeah. I like that small steps, because we often think of environmental impacts that I do or don't make in my life. So I'm running the AC too much, or I'm tossing out old food in the fridge, and I get stressed about the fact that it sat there and for 3 days in a one of those styrofoam containers. It's just going to sit in a landfill, right? And that landfill is going to eat it up. Or cloth diapering. That's one small thing that people can do to maybe start. I have not done it, but we did find some easier, more compostable diapers that we could do. So the small kind of steps. What about to the person who they hear this, or I want to start making these small steps. I want to start kind of recognizing the environmental impact. There's an element of minimalism here, reducing the things that I have. You actually are one of the reasons I joined a Buy Nothing group on Facebook, because I was I've actually got stuff I need to get rid of. I don't want to sell it. I don't want to just put it on the street where somebody will come grab it. Tell us a little bit about other things that we can do, maybe, especially when it comes to the items in our home that we want to maybe reduce because we have too much stuff and we do have that consumeristic culture. What are some things we can do to bring Christian minimalism into my life?
Yeah, that is a great question. It's so easy to acquire stuff. We pared things down to the absolute minimum. And then now that we've been off the farm from this tiny apartment for 5 years, I feel like there's just stuff everywhere. I'm now doing this huge purge because it's driving me nuts. It's just so easy to let it happen. It's so difficult to keep from having too much stuff. But I think a few things to remember is it's much easier to keep things out than get rid of stuff. So when we're thinking, oh, I really want to get a such and such, instead of just doing it right then, it's so easy to do one click Amazon, it's all set up. But to go, do I really need that thing? Maybe just sleep on it. And maybe tomorrow I'll go, I don't really need that thing. That's not necessary. So I think that's one thing, is try to be a little bit more careful with our purchases, so we're not stuck in this mound of stuff that we're trying to sort through. And then thinking of, I like to think about Christian minimalism being more like a monastic idea than a Marie Kondo idea. So Marie Kondo, she's the queen of decluttering. And the goal is that you are going to be happier if you have less stuff, which I think is true, because clutter makes us, overwhelmed. Our stuff isn't going to make us happy. And if we think it will, we're going to be disappointed. So she's partly right. But I think if we think about, okay, what does a monk do when he goes to the monastery? He gets rid of all this stuff so he can focus on God. And he's living this life of extreme minimalism for the good of other people, a life of prayer for others. He gives his stuff away to the poor. And so how can we think more in that line? What do I have too much of that I can offer to others? How can I give of my excess to those that don't have enough? So it's kind of an outward generosity rather than an inward facing, how can I make my environment just perfect for my happiness?
Yeah, it's not so much like I'm cleaning the clutter, it's how can I serve my community. So like when Claire has, as she's outgrown clothes much more rapidly than Rose did, might I add. So like we jumped up to 12-month size of things long before I was ready for it. I was like, I've got all this newborn stuff she's worn one time. I could put it in storage. We want more babies. Or I could give it to a friend of mine who has a newborn who's could use this stuff right this second. Maybe I'll get it back eventually, or maybe not. Like it's totally okay. Some kid needs it. Then it wasn't like this altruistic, like, look how generous I'm being. It was, I needed room in the drawers, but also like this could go to somebody else that needs it in this particular moment. I think if we frame it and like you said, like how can I go outward as opposed to just, I want to clean something. I want it to look tidy and like it could, live in the Modern Museum of Art. Like it actually like helps us feel a little more both connected to our neighbor and maybe connected to this earth that I'm trying to not put too much stuff in landfills. What are some of your upcoming projects, Haley? You've got so many awesome, fun things going on. Tell our listeners and viewers where they can find you, what you're doing, some of the things you've got coming down the pipe.
Sure. So I co-host a podcast called the Fountains of Carrots podcast with my friend Christy Eisinger. And so that keeps us busy. That's a lot of fun. We've been podcasting together for almost like 7 years, Katie. We're podcasting dinosaurs, but we really enjoy that. I have a book deadline coming up. I'm writing a book. The working title is Jane Austen's Genius Guide to Life. So it's basically, what does Jane Austen teach us about becoming the people that God has called us to be and becoming holy and cultivating these virtues that we see coming out in her characters and her novels. So that is so much fun, and I'm having a blast writing that. I also, that will come out next spring. And then I have a children's book coming out next fall about an order of mouse nuns who live underneath the floorboards of G.K. Chesterton's house and run a little mouse school and solve mysteries.
Nice.
They're inspired by Father to solve local crimes. So that's a lot of fun. I'm also working on some projects for the Word on Fire Institute. I'm organizing a Word on Fire book club for them. We're getting going on the Rule of St. Benedict soon. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
Nice. So that monastic life it's in your mind. I mean, and it really does, I guess kind of like that's the little wrap up is you've got all these different projects going on. I mean, you've got a garden, you've got kids, you've got recently deceased chickens, maybe some new chickens eventually, all these different projects. I think sometimes people think, okay, well, there's no minimalism in my, I'm not saying this about you, I'm saying this about myself, who's got, 20 different things going on at the same time as well, hence why I'm not home right now. But we sometimes, I feel like we think we need order, we need structure, we need to reduce our footprint in the environment because that will bring order into our lives. Or maybe, like you said, order into my mind and I can redirect myself towards prayer. I guess what's your encouragement to the person who's hesitant to do this or who thinks, okay, well, I don't have time for this, or I don't have nearly as much stuff as she thinks I have, or I'm not making that big of an imprint. Like, go look at all these corporate entities that are drilling for oil. Like they're far worse on the environment than any fruit snack packet that I'm throwing away for my kid. What would be your call to this is a work for all of us? It's care for our common home. You might not be the worst person in the world, but you still are called to do this.
Yeah, that's a great question. I always come back to this quote that it's attributed to Mother Teresa. I don't know if she really said it, but I really like it. So I'm just going to go with that. But she says, you wash the dish not because it's dirty, but because you love the person who's going to use it. And I think if we think about that and relate it to our common home, the earth, we don't preserve the earth because it's the environmentally conscious thing to do. We make these efforts because we love people. We love who's going to come after us and use this common home. And I think that if we think about it that way, there's this motivating charity that makes these little things we can only do these little things, but it makes them meaningful and it makes them significant. If I'm scrubbing out that peanut butter jar that I'm really annoyed by having to scrub it out because all the peanut butter is sticking to it, I need so much soap and let it soak to be able to put it in the recycling. If I think about Pope Francis, he would want me to do this. Like, he would want me to do this. This is a good thing if I'm doing this out of love. And this little thing does matter and it becomes significant.
Yeah, I like that. The little things that I'm doing. It might not affect me in this particular moment, but my grandkids got, hopefully that they have them. It'll affect generations to come. Haley, where can we follow you and find all these awesome projects that you're doing?
Sure. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I'm at Haley Carrots. So that's where I hang out the most, is Instagram and Twitter. And then my podcast is fountainsofcarrots.com. And my much neglected blog is Carrots for Michaelmas, spelled like Michael, M-A-S.com, Carrots for Michaelmas.
Well, we've thrown that up on the lower third, so hopefully folks go find you and follow you. Haley, thanks so much for taking the time. I know in the midst of all of this work that you've got going on, thank you for taking this half hour with us.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks so much, Katie.
I had the pleasure of meeting Haley. We spoke together at a conference in Dallas, and I got to meet her family and I got to hang out with her husband. And it was just such a fun time. We shared a cup of coffee one morning and talked about like all this awesome stuff that she's got going on. She's one of those people, one of those Catholic moms that I love to follow and see the stuff that she's doing because it's just authentic and real. And there's no bones about it. This is what she's preaching and what she's doing. And I love that encouragement that when we think about environmental science, I live in a part of the country where we have these physical chemical plants that are literally pouring, and I'm saying this knowing that it is the driving force of the economy where I'm from, but that oftentimes the lack of environmental regulations that exist there are quite concerning, or they're quite confusing even. Like, where am I supposed to fall down on this particular issue? Where you read Laudato Si and you kind of see this galvanizing call to make less of a footprint, and you're wondering how and why. And Haley's encouragement, small things can make a very big impact, and even can help us maybe live that life of deeper faith. I mean, that's what Ave Explores is all about. How can we have a conversation about this particular topic, in this instance, faith and science, and apply that to my day-to-day existence as a Catholic, to my family, to my friends, to my coworkers, within my home, within our common home. All of these conversations that we're having for Ave Explores Faith and Science are available on avemariapress.com. You can just click up right at the top. There's a nice big banner that says Ave Explores. Click on it. It'll lead you over there to where you can find the podcast, the videos, a recording of this interview and all the other ones that we have coming up, articles, videos, resource lists, all sorts of things created and designed for you to dig into this topic. This week, we're tackling this environmental science topic. Next week, we'll be talking about bioethics and all things concerning, next week, we're actually talking about creation. Bioethics is week 3. And I was just thinking about it this morning because I was telling someone about my conversation with a bioethicist about the COVID-19 vaccine. So stay tuned for that. Next week, we're talking about creation and the Big Bang Theory and all things kind of space and how small we are in comparison to the great big wide world that we have. And we have a really special guest joining us. He is a retired NASA astronaut, Colonel Benjamin Alvin Drew Jr., was educated in Catholic school, is Catholic himself, has been to space. So I can't wait. I've got my NASA t-shirt ready to go to chat with a NASA astronaut about what it's like to go to space and how his Catholic faith has guided and led him both through his scientific pursuits, but even beyond that in other areas. So I hope you join us right back here on the Ave Maria Press Facebook page at noon next Tuesday, or you watch the rebroadcast on avemariapress.com or on Instagram TV, IGTV, as the kids call it. Always so glad to have you with us. Go to avemariapress.com to find all of the other content that we're creating just for you. And we'll see you back here next week. Thanks for joining us.